Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So this video will be slightly different to my usual videos. This will be an introduction video to show you a new garden that I'll be featuring a lot on my channel. So as some of you might know, I've just recently moved up to North Scotland. That means I'm going to be expanding the channel. I'm going to be able to do more houseplants than before because I have a conservatory. I'm also going to be doing a lot more garden plants as well. So one of the gardens I'm doing is my own garden. The second one, which is the one you'll see the most of in the first year until I get ready with my own garden, because I've got a lot to do in the house first of all. This will be the garden. It's actually my parents' garden. I'm just going to give you a brief tour and tell you where it is in Scotland roughly. A brief history on the garden since my parents have had it. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. I could probably spend a few hours talking about every single plant in this garden, as I visit regularly and I've got photographic updates of all the plants. So if you want a more in-depth video series, let me know and I can go around every single plant. I can probably show photos from the last 8 years and show how they've grown, how they've done. Basically, this is my parents' house. I've lived here now in North Scotland for about, I think it's 8 years. I'll put a date on the screen in case I'm incorrect. And when they first got this garden, it was just basically an empty field. There was just this big patch of grass at the back, big lawn, a raised section here with a lawn, and a row of Leylandii shrubs at the back. The Leylandii trees, they were only just recently planted, so they weren't too tall. So to give you some context of this house, we're currently in North Scotland at 58 degrees north. This is why the channel is called 58 degrees north, because of the location we're at. It's quite exposed. It's on top of a cliff. The sea is just over there behind those houses, about 100 meters away. We get a lot of wind. The main problem here is wind. It's also quite a cold location as well. It doesn't get very cold in winter because we're near the sea, so the frost protects it quite a lot, but generally it is quite a windswept garden. The main problem is the wind, and the summer temperatures are quite cool as well, being in the north coast. So we're kind of between Aberdeen and Inverness along the north coast of Scotland. I'll just zoom in now. Hopefully we can see some of the mountains if it's clear enough. You can see across to the north is the sea and some more of Scotland. That's some mountains there in North Scotland covered in snow. So there's some nice views, but mostly there's not too many views from here. So north of here there's not much, to be honest. There's a bit of Scotland, there's the Faroe Islands, Iceland, Greenland and the North Pole. So between here and the North Pole there's not really much at all, just a few people, a few rugged landscapes. So right on the edge of what you consider good farming land or agricultural land. North of here there's not really any farmland in Scotland. It's all kind of rough grazing or forestry. This is probably as far north as you get in most of the world when it comes to good farming land, and even then it's quite cold farming land, so you won't be getting maize or anything like that. So I'll give you a tour of the garden. So this is the top section. Not much goes on here. It's quite shady because the aspect of the garden is I'm facing north right now, so behind me is the house which is south. So because of that, this section doesn't get much light. It's shaded by the house. It is a bungalow, but the roof's high enough that this doesn't get a lot of light. So we don't do much with this area. It tends to be quite empty. This bed at the end though this was already in here, one of the first original features of the garden, and these are the original plants. So we've not really done anything with that. Just a few lavenders, a hypericum, azalea, things like that. I'll probably be renewing this bed at some point in the future. Coming down we have a half-built chalet, which I'll probably do a video update on this at some point. It's been a slow build, partly because this is 100% recycled materials. You can see some of the beams here are actually driftwood, such as this one here. It's also driftwood at the end. As I say, 100% recycled materials, so the chalet gets built as and when there's materials for it. Same with the windows, all second hand. The only thing that's new on this chalet is the sarking board, the roof frame and the actual metal on the roof sheeting, just to make sure it was 100% watertight. So everything else is second hand, which is why it's taken a long time to build, as every single piece of wood is a slightly different size and thickness. But maybe I'll do an update video on this at some point. It looks quite well complete from this side, but actually the inside is not finished, and we still have a wall on this side that still needs to be constructed. So that'll be quite a long ongoing project. As I say, my channel is mainly about plants, so I might not focus too much on this, but that's always going to be in the background of some of the videos. So coming around here, we have two of the original trees in the garden. So the garden's separated into two main sections. That area is kind of the productive vegetable side. This area is the more ornamental and fruit side. So over here we have herbaceous borders. We have things like hostas down here, obviously not much to sow at the moment. A small patch of mint, various shrubs and herbaceous plants. This is mainly a herbaceous border, so most things have died back. See, like there's a potentilla down there. We've got a lupin over there. Several other plants, a hebe, some wallflowers. I planted these wallflower seeds. I probably planted about 1,000 seeds. The seeds were 10 years old, so I didn't expect them to grow. We ended up with about 100 plants. So you'll see lots of these wallflowers dotted around the garden. They're probably about 3 or 4 years old now, so they're just getting to the end of their life. Again, herbaceous border. This was put in. It is a real mixture. There was supposed to be a herbaceous border, but it's now really a mixed border with shrubs and herbaceous plants. This is what my mum does, so this will probably need a little bit of work. It will look quite nice in the midsummer when all the plants are up, but at the moment it looks quite bare. There's also things like a blueberry at the end, some rosemary, ceanothus at the end here, and also a broom. So this will look nicer later on, but at the moment it's quite bare. A few weeds coming up, needs a bit of work on it. Also the edge needs to be put back in to stop the grass spreading into it. So further around here, I said earlier, this is the section that had a couple of original trees. So the two original trees was a damson, which is this one here, which has grown a fair bit since we first arrived, and we're just having to keep it in check so it doesn't swamp the chalet over here. Coming along, the other original tree was this small flowering cherry, but it's never done well. I think the main problem is it's swamped by the grass, and if anything, it's getting smaller every year as the shoots keep dying back. And you can see that there's a few flowers coming on it, but it's pretty much dying off, so that's probably going to die at some point. But elsewhere in here, this whole section underneath the trees, the plan is eventually to have a flower meadow. There's a lot of spring bulbs starting to come up. There's some further down. I'll just zoom on. I don't like to walk too much in this area at this time of year because there's a lot of bulbs coming up. You can see there we've got some crocuses. There should also be some irises as well. The plan is once these trees get taller, they'll shade out the grass. That will weaken the grass and make it easier to grow wildflowers in here. What we're going to try and do is a load of spring flowers coming up in early spring before the trees come up with their leaves, and then once the leaves come on the trees, we'll have some more shade tolerant plants which will take over from the spring plants. So it'll be mainly herbaceous plants and a few wildflowers, but it'll have to be shade tolerant wildflowers. But for now it's still quite open. These trees were only planted about 2 years ago. I think we've got a plum. This one here is a plum. We've got 2 apples down here, and then that one with all the wood chips is a cherry. These are done okay. They are a little bit windswept, and so they've been thickening up since they were planted, but they haven't really put on any new top growth. So this will be kind of a fruit orchard come wildflower meadow with lots of spring bulbs. Around the edge there's a few plants, such as the Christmas tree. You see the Cotoneaster there with the red berries at the wall. Also a pyracantha on that wall. We might put some more shrubs in at some point, but generally the walls are actually quite well planted up. We've also got quite a few fruit shrubs in this area, but it does need some work. With the grass always keeps taking over the beds. My parents have done their best with bark and chipping and things like that, but we'll probably need to put in a proper border at some point to stop the grass from spreading in, because the chippings work for a year or so, and then when they rot down the grass comes back. So as I say, we've got some currant bushes. There's one down there. There's also one right next to the compost bin, which is that small one just down there with a stake. Another fruit currant bush here, and then we have a currant bush here, but they're actually quite sickly at the moment, apart from one in the compost bin, so they'll need a little bit of work. Coming along, we've got a few more wallflowers. This is a wild damson, so this will probably need taken out at some point because this will send lots of suckers up and slowly take over the garden. We also have a nice elm tree. Planted this as a seedling. We've had to start cutting it quite a lot now because it grows really fast and we don't want it to undermine the wall. Coming along, we've got a nice black Sambucus here. This has lovely lacy black foliage in summer. You can see some of it starting to come out already as we've had some warmer weather recently, even though it's the middle of February. You can see some foliage just starting there. We've also got Skimia. We've got these 2 nice Camellias which came with the garden as well. They're looking quite nice at the moment, ready to flower as well. You can see these really big fat flower buds. These always flower quite early because we're quite close to the sea here. The winters are quite mild, and so they do get an early start in the spring compared with most places this far north. There's also a nice row of daffodils all on the back here. They're only just starting to come up now, but you can see some there. I planted them about 3 or 4 years ago, so they're starting to spread quite nicely, and I'm sure I'll give you an update of them later on. So coming around, we have an original rose that was in the garden when they got it. There's also this hydrangea as well, but everything else I think has pretty much been planted since. This is the only leylandi that we left in this section. We'll probably be removing it at some point. If we hadn't have cut them, they would have been huge, and I'll show you a picture. I'll show you a section that we kept later on in the corner of the garden, which we've let to grow full size, and it's really grown large. We've also got here a nice forsythia just starting to bud up. This will probably need pruned at some point, but it's going to have some really nice yellow flowers soon in spring. Nice contorted willow, which we planted, it's also grown a lot. There's a few herbaceous plants in the back here, but it's mainly shrubs. We've got some lovage down here. The lovage grows really tall. You can see the old flower spike from last year. It's probably about 2.5 meters, possibly 3 meters tall, and that always flowers nicely, and it's a great herb for cooking soups and things. And then we have just a normal buddleia, which again needs a bit of pruning work, and a jasmine, which is just there on a temporary basis. So coming round, we're now in the vegetable section, and the biggest section of the vegetables, or the longest section of the vegetable section anyway, is the raspberry cane area. So what we have here is raspberry canes that we planted, just a small line of them, a very long line but thin line, when my parents first moved in about 7-8 years ago, and they've really grown well. We're having to constantly cut them back because they're actually spreading into the grass. Some of the roots actually run right under the grass and into the vegetable plot, so they put in some edging. There might need to be some more edging put in at some point to stop them spreading, but they're doing quite well. The autumn flowering and fruiting raspberry canes, and often with autumn raspberry canes you cut them down to the ground every winter. We keep them because that way you get a double crop, so it means our autumn crop is not as big, but we also get a summer crop. And as you can see, it's such a long line, you don't really want them all cropping at once because there's a massive glut, far too many raspberries. Raspberries are one of the fruits that we do really well in Scotland because they like quite cool damp conditions, and we get a lot of that here, so they really do well. And to cut down on the wind problems, there's a lot of wind breaks we put in, so we put here is willow. We're pollarding this each year now. It's only been pollarded once since it was first put in. I think these are about 3 or 4 years old, these canes. Pollarded the first time last winter. You can see there, that's where it was cut off at that point there. It's sprouted up really well. I'll be making a video soon about cutting these back for pollarding, because normally we try and wait until the end of winter so that there's as much protection from the wind as possible. Even though there's no leaves on these, they still offer some protection from the wind. They just slow the wind and filter it down a small amount. But because the winter's been so mild, they're actually starting to sprout some leaves already. So you can see here, the buds are just starting to burst. So normally, as I say, I would leave this until the end of winter, but this year it's just been so mild they're starting to grow already, so I'll be pruning them soon, probably the middle of February, end of February. And you can see as well, they've grown about 3-4 meters since we pruned them, so they're really strong, vigorous hybrid willows. And we use this for support, hopefully, for the instead of bamboo canes, we'll use it for the peas and beans and things like that. So I'll show you the top of this really tall one, and you'll be able to see another nice added benefit of these lovely catkins. I think this did have pollen on it, but a lot of it's been blown off in a recent storm. So that's another nice thing. Once we do pollard it, I'll collect all the stems, and I'll make some flower arranging inside the house. And then this is the main productive area of the garden. I have done a video before about my parents' garden, how it's basically self-sufficient in vegetables and food. So I'll put a link now on the iCard, which should be just up here, and that'll have information about that video, about all their vegetables and things. But in a nutshell, this is just their 4 main vegetable plots, and there's 4 sections with 4 paths in between. There's a main permanent path, which you can see with the lawn, and then there's these 2 paths here as well, which are wood chippings. We then also have a few temporary paths going up and down to try and get to the middle of the plots, and they also look after this in a crop rotation. So every year each quarter has a different type of plant on it to make sure there's no build-up of disease or pests, and make sure the plants are always getting the most nutrition they can. Because if you always grow the same plant in the same soil, it'll take all the nutrition it wants, and then it'll be quite devoid of that certain nutrients for that plant. So you want to put a different plant in that likes different nutrients, and that way you never have too many disease problems or nutritional problems. So they have a mixture of gardening techniques they use here. They use quite a few permaculture techniques, organic gardening as well. Don't believe there's any chemicals they use at all. They normally feed with compost or seaweed, and they also do a lot of back to Eden style gardening, which is mulching the ground with materials such as wood chips. So they use the wood chips for things like the paths, like this down there and down at the end. They also use things like hedge cuttings. This is old privet hedge cuttings, and you can see some more wood chips over there. They cover the soil, that keeps the moisture in. As it rots down, it also creates wonderful compost, really enriches the soil. So you can see here, this is the old potato plot. My father's just currently digging up the potatoes. The section with the grass is all that's left of where the potatoes were. The section in the middle is where it was recently dug up. And this bit here, I believe, is the new onion sets that they've planted. They normally have almost a whole section full of onions because they probably eat about 300 or 400 onions a year. So we often have potatoes, onions. We have a brassica section, so that things like kale, cabbage, broccoli, things like that. It needs to be netted because here in North Scotland we have a lot of butterflies called cabbage white butterflies. And cabbage white butterflies, they feed on the caterpillars anyway, feed on the brassicas. So if it wasn't for this, they would be devastated. There's also a lot of other problems with the brassicas. We have clubroot here in this area, so we have to be quite careful when we're growing them from a young age. There's certain things you need to do to make sure you don't get clubroot. Clubroot basically forms a matted mess of roots, and they don't grow properly, and it just weakens the plant. I'll put a link up here for a video that I made about that in the past. We also get cabbage root fly as well, which are these little maggots that the flies lay their eggs on the base of the plant. You can actually see here on the base of this plant they put some collars. That's a little collar there around the base of the plant. That's to stop the cabbage root fly from laying its eggs. Without that, the little maggots then eat all the roots away and kill the plant. And then you also get problems with aphids and things. So brassicas, although this is a great climate for it, brassicas really do well with the long summer days. So here, because we're so far north, daylight's really bad in winter. This midday at the moment, and you can see my shadow is really quite long. It is February, so the sun's not as bad as it was, but come midwinter, sun's only up for a few hours of the day, and this part of the garden doesn't even get the sun because the buildings up there are on a slight hill, so they actually block the sun during midday. You can see actually that the line on the polytunnel there, how shallow the angle of the sun is. It's really, you can see there, a very shallow angle even at midday. So although we get dark winters, we get really long summers, or really long daylight hours anyway in the summer, and the sun can rise at 3 or 4 in the morning, set around 9 or 10 at night, and the brassicas love those conditions. Cool weather with really long sunshine hours, so they actually grow really well, but only if we can keep all these pests and diseases away. This is why we have the netting. And finally, the other problem we have here is a lot of pigeons, and they love eating the brassicas. You can probably see some damage on the leaves here. That's from a combination of slugs, caterpillars, snails, and probably some pigeons as well. So that's one of the biggest hurdles here, is trying to grow these brassicas. Even though they love the climate, they really don't do well with all the pests and diseases we have. And coming around here, I think they've had some parsnips, so they often grow a lot of peas and beans. You can see the remnants of last year's runner beans all tangled up there in the branches. And they also do a lot of salad crops out here as well, and spinach and things like that. So I think that's, and also root crops such as carrots, potatoes and parsnips. So I think that's most of what I need to say about this area in the vegetable plot. Not much to see at the moment because it's the middle of winter, but I'll show you some pictures quickly of how it looks during midsummer. It does actually look really nice, and there's loads of plants, and they actually are self-sufficient in vegetables because they do so well here. One of the advantages here is the soil's really nice. It's actually a very sandy soil. There's a lot of wind blown sand. We occasionally get sandstorms up here. It blows off the farmers' fields, and it's really sandy soil because of that, so it's nice and easy to work. They have improved it hugely. You can see it's really nice and dark, the soil, because of all the compost they've added and all the mulch. So it's really nice, rich soil, really loose but full of organic matter. So it is actually a really nice soil. It wasn't too bad when we first came, but it was just lacking a bit in organic matter. So because of all the seaweed and the compost my dad digs in every year, it's become a really nice rich soil, and the plants do quite well even if the climate isn't always so forgiving. So one of the problems we have is wind. That's one of the reasons I put this big eucalyptus in the middle. It should be a lot taller and thinner, but with the wind it's really been battered around. And I'll show you a quick video clip now of what it's like on a windy day, so you can see how much these things do blow around in the wind, and that's why this has got a slight lean on it. So this is an example of quite a windy day at my parents' place. It's about 43 mile/an-hour gusts at the moment that they're forecasting, although I reckon they're only about 25-30 here in the garden. So this is just to give you a quick view of what it's like when it's really windy. I'll show all the shelter belts and all the hedges to protect from the wind on another part of the video, so you can actually hear me explaining it better without the wind noise. But I'll just show you a few clips now of the wind, so you can see it going through the plants. So you can see here, you've got this line of willow. It's really starting to batter about in the wind, and that helps to provide quite a bit of shelter, especially in summer when it's got the leaves on, not so much in winter now. But you can see it there, really flailing around in the wind. Something else you can see that catches the wind and just provides a bit of shelter in the middle here is the eucalyptus tree. Just wait for a strong gust there. You can see really getting battered about by the wind, and it's actually got a slight lean on it now, and that's because over time it's been pushed, because there's prevailing southwesterly winds here, so that's pushed the tree slightly towards the east now, so it is actually leaning. And every year this gets a lot of leaves taken off by the wind. I'll show you a few clips now, some pictures of what it looked like a few years ago when almost all the leaves were falling off from the wind and also from the salt. And there are some taller ones around. There is one over here. You can see that's getting battered by the wind. That's the same type of eucalyptus, just a lot more mature and older. It doesn't ever really get any taller than that because the wind comes along and breaks off some of the branches, so that's about the maximum height because of the wind. But you can see this, even this young one here, one's of the same variety. This is a Eucalyptus gunnii, it's a snow gum. There's similar ones in just a few miles further inland, and they're a lot taller, a lot skinnier. You can see this is quite a rounded shape, this unusual shape for a Eucalyptus gunnii. They normally grow straight up, quite thin. So as you can see from that, we do get some very windy weather in this area, and that's one of the biggest problems here. So we've got this windbreak here from the eucalyptus in the middle. The polytunnel made a huge difference when that came in. That really cut down a lot of wind, especially on this side here. The wind predominantly comes from a west or southwesterly direction, so this section here is where the wind comes from, and so that's where the biggest windbreaks tend to be. We also, because the middle of the garden was quite a distance away from that wall where we put some trees, it's also got quite windy towards this side of the garden, so that's why we've gone with the willow and also with the eucalyptus. The eucalyptus roots, they could become a problem in the future, but because we dig over the plot every few years, the eucalyptus roots are cut off, so that doesn't really become a major issue. So over this side we have things like holm oaks. They try and create a hedge to stop the wind. We also have a broom here, which is a native plant which really does very well in winter locations and flowers really nicely. There's another original tree to the garden, which is this rowan here. It's native to the tops of the mountains in Scotland, and it can handle really strong winds. It doesn't form the best break because it doesn't normally grow that densely, although this particular specimen is growing quite dense. But the best way that we keep the wind away is with the leylandi. So we transferred some leylandi over here, As you can see, it's a nice solid wall, stops the wind really nicely. We've also got an original Christmas tree here, which has been suffered by some pests which have been eating the needles, which is why it's looking so bare. Hopefully that will recover soon, but it's really looking quite sickly, so I'll see how that does. We've also got another Christmas tree down there as well. This one we planted a few years ago. It's nice and thick, and it should grow quite well and make a nice windbreak in the future. And there's also a few other shrubs like Escallonia. Escallonia likes a slightly warmer climate, but it does okay here, and it can survive quite bad wind conditions. So right at the corner here, we've also put some Leylandi. The Leylandi, as I say, are really good solid barrier against the wind. We've grown this extra tall because when we get a northerly wind, there's no houses in front of us in this section of the garden, so the northerly winds can really batter through. These are the original Leylandi. They weren't in this position, but we replanted them. As you can see, they've really grown big. These plants, if we hadn't have cut them, they probably would have been 3 times the height by now. You can see the trunk in there. It's already got to quite a size. And Leylandi can grow about 1 metre or 2 here in Scotland. They like the high rainfall that we have and the long days in summer, so they, even though it's quite cold, they do grow quite well. And this is a really good solid barrier, and this will really help with the wind. We've also got the compost heap here, just out of the way in a nice hidden area. I'll probably make an update video on this soon because we'll need to replace it. Compost is about 6 or 7 years old, and when we first built it, it was made out of old recycled timber, which was already starting to go rotten with woodworm, so it needs replaced at some point. But I'll now take you into the polytunnel. So this is the polytunnel. I think the polytunnel's been here about 5 years now. I won't give you a huge tour of the polytunnel because there's nothing really to see in winter, and I've done several other polytunnel videos, and I'll show you some of them in the iCard up on the corner here. So the first section here is kind of like a workstation. So I've built here a big potting bench. I've got a video of this, of me constructing it, and I'll put that up here on the iCard so you can watch that if you want. It's basically made out of my old bunk bed. You've got the ends to the old bunk bed. The middle section is just random pieces of wood. We've got some pull-outs for things like pots, some shelving for pots underneath, a little chute for putting in any waste, and a compost dispenser, some more shelves for any other tools. And this is where I pot up most of the plants. So get the compost from here, pot up the plants in this area, and then we can have them growing in the polytunnel in a nice sheltered environment. Polytunnel is really quite important here in North Scotland. If you're wanting to grow anything that likes a bit of warmth or heat, there's no chance you can grow it outside. So things like courgettes, pumpkins, tomatoes, peppers, aubergines, those sort of things, they won't really grow outside, or not very well. If you grow them outside, you might get 1 or 2 fruits from a tomato and that's it, but to be honest, you'll probably just get green tomatoes here in North Scotland. The maximum temperature is normally about 17-18 degrees in summer, so it doesn't get very warm. So you need something like a polytunnel, traps the sun, keeps it really warm, also provides some protection from the frost during the winter time. It allows you to grow plants that you otherwise wouldn't be able to grow this far north. So these are quite popular here in North Scotland. There's a lot of people with polytunnels, and you can probably, in a hot day, or sort of say a sunny day, it might be only 15-20 degrees outside, but it can be 30-40 or even hotter in here. So it really does make a big difference, and it allows us to grow things we otherwise wouldn't be able to. And I have got a heating system in here to help it a little bit. That heating system it's just a massive storage of heat from the day. So what I've got is a thermal bank basically, or thermal battery. There's a big extractor fan up here. It sucks out the hot air from at the top of the polytunnel, blows it down these tubes. It then follows the path underneath. The warm air then cools down and heats up the bed. The remaining warm air then comes to an old oil tank which is under here, circles around that twice and comes out of that vent down there. And then when it comes out, it'll be quite cool air, because all the warmth from that hot air has then been transferred to either the water in the water tank or into the soil. So that's heated up the soil, heated up the water, and then at night time when the system's running, that heat then comes out of the vent and also leaches out of the soil, and it just keeps it warm by about 2 or 3 degrees, and it also helps reduce the high temperatures in the middle of the day by 2 or 3 degrees. Now some systems people make of these, they work really well, and you can have 5 or 10 degree difference in temperature. This system, we didn't have the finances to make a proper really big thermal battery bank with giant fans and hundreds of meters of pipe. We probably only got about 30 meters of piping, and I'll put there's a link up here on the iCard, and you can see the construction and how I did it. But basically we've got quite a high water table here. Yesterday there was actually a lot of standing water in here. It's gone down because we've had a couple of days of dry weather, but you can still see a bit of water in there. That shows you the height of the water table. When it's really wet, the water table can actually come right up to the level of the soil, which floods the air pipes which carry the air around the system, so we couldn't bury it as deep as you would in a normal system. But as I say, I'll explain all that in the video, and I'll put that in the iCard now so you can watch that whenever you'd like. But this is the polytunnel. It's pretty empty at the moment. Everything's died back for winter. They were hoping to grow some winter salads in here, but they had a real problem with slugs and snails, and they've all been eaten, unfortunately. They did have a good crop here recently, but they've all been devastated by the snails. So I think they'll be showing them again soon, hopefully getting some more slug traps to trap the slugs and snails. Got a couple of radishes trying to come up there, but you can see this one down here looks like it might already be a little bit nibbled. So the other place we have to grow plants that's a bit more sheltered is a greenhouse. So very similar to the polytunnel, it just keeps it nice and warm inside, helps us grow plants we otherwise wouldn't be able to grow this far north. A lot of you probably have seen greenhouses before. They're a lot more common than polytunnels. And in here, because it tends to get hot in the polytunnel and it tends to be a lot drier as well, we put more Mediterranean style plants, so peppers and tomatoes as well. In the polytunnel, it's mainly more humid tropical plants we put in there. So we'll put things that don't mind high humidity, such as some of the butternut squashes and things like that. But for now, this is just sheltering some of the plants that otherwise would maybe get a bit damaged by the frost. So I've actually got some of my balcony plants here at the moment. I've got my, you can see I've got my fuchsia here. It's not looking too good, it's the middle of winter and it's got aphids on it as well. So I'll need to make an update video on that soon. I've also got my geraniums here, which are looking quite healthy, but they'll probably need to be repotted. I've also got my cycad, which is one of my oldest houseplants. It's been living out here in the greenhouse for a while. It can take cold temperatures, but it likes really hot summer temperatures to grow, so this is why it's in the greenhouse. But hopefully I'll do an update video on that so you'll learn more about that. And we've also got a big lemon verbena here as well, which has an amazing lemon scent, but it dies back every year with the frost, almost to the ground, but it always resprouts really nicely. So there's not much here to see in the greenhouse, but there'll be a lot coming up in future videos. And if you're wondering why there's lots of water bottles around the place, the reason for that is similar to the storage, the heat storage that we have in the polytunnel with the fan. This is a passive form of it. You'll also notice there's a big black barrel here, another one there full of water. When it's hot in the day, that absorbs the heat, and then when it's cold at night, that heat then slowly comes out and keeps it slightly warmer in here. It's not enough to keep the whole place warm, but if we have some young seedlings, what we'll do is we'll get 3 or 4 water bottles and just surround the seedling with that, and that'll be just enough to keep it 1 or 2 degrees warmer. So if there's a frost, it's just enough to save that plant. But as I say, it's not a proper replacement for heating, but because here they don't get hard frost, maybe -3, -5 at the most, it can be just enough to keep the frost at bay. And in springtime, when your frosts are only going to be -1, -2, that's all you need really to keep the frost at bay from the young seedlings. So coming out the back here, we've got the at the back of the greenhouse, we've also got the back of the polytunnel. This area is a little more sheltered because of the polytunnel there, the big hedge as well protecting it, and also the greenhouse. So the plants here are actually growing a bit quicker. So you can see the daffodils here, because they're sheltered from the wind, they're actually shooting up quite quick. They're almost going to flower soon. Got some quite big buds already. An example of how much they've expanded, when you see little clumps like this, I planted all these bulbs individually. So this would have been one bulb that I planted about 5 or 6 years ago, and now you can see there's 8 flowers on this, so there's probably about 8 bulbs under there. So it's really spreading nicely, and at some point we'll probably need to separate these and spread them out. You can see here another patch which is really quite dense. Some of them haven't spread so much, so you can see like this one here, it's only got 2 bulbs. Here there's only about 3 bulbs, but generally they're doing quite well. They're spreading, and we're going to spread them further at some point and have a really nice collection of daffodils. Around here we've also got some blackberries. The other ones in the garden I think are probably self-seeded weeds. These are actually cultivated blackberries. These are quite nice because they're thornless. You can see here the stem's completely smooth, you don't have to worry about cutting your hands. It's not the best location for it because it's not quite that, it's not as sunny as it used to be before the polytunnel came, but they still do quite well. Blackberries often grow in the woodlands, so even though it's not really strong sunshine, they can handle a bit of shade and they'll still fruit. And we've also got here a hazel as well, a small hazel tree, which will use the stems when they get older for supports, because they grow lots of straight stems. They keep sending up new suckers from the base. You get some nice strong straight rods for supporting the garden. Also has these nice catkins at this time of year. This is quite a young tree, so there's not too many catkins at the moment, but there's still a few that look quite nice. And when this is a mature tree, it'll be absolutely covered in winter time with these catkins. And then in summer we'll also have some nice, or the end of summer, we'll have some hazelnuts to harvest. So this tree, the catkins are the male flowers. The female flowers, which will produce the hazelnuts, are these ones here. You can see the tiny little red flower, that's all it is. Now we've not had any hazels on this yet, as it's quite a young plant, but we're hoping in the next year or two we might start getting hazels. We've also planted some other ones down here. This is actually the size, probably about 6, 7, 8 years ago. This plant here was actually this size. You can see we planted a few small ones. And the reason for that is when they flower naturally in the wild, the male flowers and the female flowers on the individual plants come out at different times. They don't self-pollinate themselves, so that way they get pollen from a different plant. So planting these different ones here, these young ones, when they grow up, they'll flower at a different time to this one, and then we should get really good harvest of hazelnuts. You can see there's loads and loads of sections here with female flowers, so if they're all getting pollinated we would end up with loads of hazelnuts. But at the moment we're not expecting much until these young ones grow up, which will probably be in about 4 or 5 years, and then we'll hopefully get a nice crop of hazelnuts. So the last section of the garden is on the western side. You can see it's just up here from the polytunnel and the vegetable plot, and just round by the side of the house. What we've got here is we've got a line of oak trees at the side. These are holm oaks, evergreen. They make a really nice thick hedge, so that'll be good for the wind protection. Also got a oak tree which has been really smothered by the grass. This oak tree is actually one of the first trees I planted in the garden, but it's been so slow growing. You can see it's still really tiny, and that tree was planted at the same size and the same time as the hazel, but you can see how big the hazel now is and how small that oak is. And even around here we've got a larch tree. This larch tree is actually only planted about 2 or 3 years ago, and you can see already it's getting really large. This will grow 2 or 3 foot a year. Larches like quite cool climates. They grow in the tops of mountains, so they do really well here in Scotland. This is a hybrid larch as well, so it's going to be extra vigorous, and it's one of the few conifers that loses its needles, so it goes a lovely yellow colour in autumn when it loses its needles, and then it'll be a lovely lime green colour in summer with soft needles when they come back on it. And along here just a mixture of more shrubs such as buddleia. We've got some lavenders. The lavenders are quite old, so I might be taking some cuttings this year to get a few more of them, because lavenders don't normally last too long. After 5 to 10 years they tend to get quite straggly and woody, and they don't do so well, so they'll need replaced. And we've also got some more wallflowers. Around the side here's my mum's wildflower meadow. It doesn't look like anything really at the moment because it's the middle of winter, and this is normally full of wildflowers in the summertime. There's a few perennial flowers, so you can see here some plants are still there. There's also a few wild self-seeded wallflowers here. The original wallflowers are planted along the back there, and I think these ones have kind of self-seeded over time. Coming along, there's a very small patch of garden at the front here. We don't really haven't really done much with this, so I'll maybe be doing an update video on that soon. Add a little bit more to this front garden. And we did at one point plant up the spaces on the wall here with plants, but they've really kind of finished now, so we need to replace them soon. There were alpines, but the weeds have come in and choked them out. They're still there, the alpines, but with all the grass they've really become choked. And finally, around the side of the house is the rose that I pruned recently on a video. I'll put that again up in the iCard so you can have a look at that if you want. And you can see it's been a few weeks since I did that video. Even though it's the middle of February, it's already starting to grow. We just had some really unusual warm weather recently, so that's why that's growing at the moment. And along at the front of the house there's quite a few climbers that we've got. This area probably needs a bit of weeding soon. We let the the Foxglove self-seed. They look really nice. They're a native plant to Scotland. They have amazing flowers, and because they're native, they do really well here in our summers. They grow up to 2 meters tall as well if they're in a good location. Absolutely covered in purple flowers. They're probably one of my favourite plants here in Scotland. Really good for self-seeding everywhere, and they look amazing as well. So along the front here, probably need to do a little bit of work with the weeding. We've got a few nice plants, such as this fuchsia here. Another example of how warm it's been is we've got a flower that's actually still on that, even though it's to be flowering in summer. We've also got a Wisteria, which has been growing really fast. This will need some work on it soon. We need to put some new wires in, so I'll be making a wiring video on this in the near future. It's got some wires at the moment, but nowhere near as many as it needs, as this will become a really big plant and it will cover right down almost to the end of the wall down there. So as we come along, we've also got some more lavenders, some hypericums, although these have been self-seeding everywhere, so we'll probably have to be careful these don't take over the whole bed. You can see down here all these little plants are self-seeded hypericums. This type of hypericum is really bad for self-seeding everywhere. We've also got clematis here. This isn't a good wall for a clematis because it's south-facing. Clematis don't like to be in a really warm, sunny, dry location, so we'll probably transplant this somewhere else at some point because it's not been doing well. But it does flower every now and again, and but it hasn't really grown much, so that's probably going to be replaced. We've also got some more shrubs, such as this Cotoneaster. We've got a nice ceanothus here. This ceanothus normally flowers quite nicely in spring, but now it's got so large that we need to start pruning it. It doesn't flower as well as it used to because pruned ceanothus doesn't flower as well as unpruned ceanothus. But we have this here at the front because it's sheltered and it's really sunny, and ceanothus really needs the heat to grow well. We have another plant here which is supposed to be a climbing rose, but it's never really grown like a climbing rose. It's always grown like a shrub rose, so we're not sure if that was incorrectly labelled. But it seems to be healthy enough. It just doesn't really grow as tall as a climbing rose should. And then we have a small section full of foxgloves, which will probably need thinning out and weeding at some point, as it's starting to look a bit messy. But that's it for this video. I'll hopefully give you an update on this garden soon. There'll be a lot of work going on. The first update will probably be the pruning of the willow. You've also seen an update recently with the pruning of the roses down the end there. But it'll be a new garden. There'll be a lot of interesting videos coming on it. Depends how busy I'll be with the new house as well, with the house plants and things like that. But I'll still be doing a lot of videos on this soon. I'm going to be doing a lot of seed videos, starting for the vegetable plots for the year. And if you have any suggestions of what you might want to see grown, let me know. But generally it's all cold climate vegetables, and in the polytunnel greenhouse it's the more tropical vegetables.